Hello, Miss Mamta. Uh, Miss Mamta, am I audible? Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miss Stuti Pandya, and I'll be taking today's session on research and teaching aptitude. I shall share my screen and we'll begin in a minute. All right, so we'll begin with the research and teaching aptitude session today. Uh, let's talk about research aptitude first. So when we look at aptitude, so what I did when I was studying for my net, I focused on a few categories that are important when it comes to research methodology. So here are the categories mentioned on the screen. First is classification by depth or scope of objectives, classification by degree of structure, classification by control over variables, classification by analytical intent, and philosophical paradigms. Now, of course, research is quite vast and very broad. But while I was studying, I narrowed it down into these different categories, and then I studied. So first, let's look at classification by depth or scope of objectives. So questions, what I observed was questions from these category usually tried to test whether I could identify the purpose of a study. So instead of really like memorizing definitions of different terms, I tried to look for the objective of the researcher. So I would suggest you that when you're looking at this particular category, you ask yourself the following questions. Is the researcher trying to explore something new? Or like is the question asking you to describe a phenomenon? Is it asking you to explain a relationship? Is it trying to ask you to predict an outcome? So it gets easier when you're trying to find out or identify the researcher's intention. What you can do to focus on while studying is focus on whether the part is exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, predictive, if it's an evaluation research or if it's an action research. So when you read the questions, try to pay attention to verbs such as explore, describe, explain, predict, improve, and evaluate. So these words often reveal whether what the answer is. Next is classification by degree of structure. So, questions in this category generally compare structured and unstructured approaches. So, rather than remembering wrong definitions of any particular term, uh, I tried to focus on the level of flexibility in the research process or what the question was trying to ask. So when you read a question, I suggest you ask, are the procedures fixed? Are the questions predetermined? Or maybe you could ask something like, can the researcher modify the process during data collection? And when you're trying to study this topic, you can study structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, unstructured interviews, surveys, or open-ended methods. And whenever you read a question that says standardized instruments, fixed procedures, predetermined questions, your first idea in your brain should ideally be that the answer usually points towards a structured approach. And words like open-ended, flexible, and emerging design usually indicate less structured or qualitative approaches. So these are the first two categories are about these two. Then we look at classification by control over variables. So sometimes questions just test whether students can identify the amount of control a researcher has. So when solving a question, you immediately look for words such as manipulation, treatment, control group, random assignment, intervention. So of course, as these names suggest, these indicate experimental research. And while you're studying, you focus on experimental research, quasi-experimental research. You can also focus on non-experimental research and ex post facto research. So different types of research you can study so that you're able to answer the questions immediately. And just remember this one thing, that manipulation, if there's some sort of manipulation involved, it is experimental. And if there is observation without manipulation, then it is non-experimental. So this one single rule will really help you clarify a lot of things. Next is classification by analytical intent. So as the name suggests, analytical intent, this category focuses on the type of analysis being conducted. So most questions revolve around identifying whether a study is quantitative, quality, or mixed. When you solve such questions, I would suggest ignore the topic and focus on the data. So you ask yourself, is the researcher working with numbers? Is the researcher working with experiences? Or is the researcher trying to inculcate both? So you will get your answer what type of what type of analytical intent the question has. And when you're trying to study for this particular category, you focus on different types of research that I just mentioned, quantitative, qualitative. Within quantitative, you can focus on statistical analysis, correlation, experimental studies. Whereas when you're trying to study qualitative research, you can focus on narrative research, phenomenology, ethnography, grounded theory, case study. So you make sure that you know what these types are, but also try to study the features of them very well. So once you are well versed with the features, you will automatically be able to spot what category the question is asking, and how it is different from other categories. And of course, mixed methods is a combination of both. So once you know quantitative and qualitative, and when a question is combining the best of both, then you know it's a mixed method research. And again, if any question involves mean, standard deviation, correlation, hypothesis testing, then try to bring your focus to quantitative research. And when you see a question is asking you about lived experiences, themes, narratives, meanings, then you bring your focus to qualitative research. And the last, fifth one is philosophical paradigms. Now, I found like this I really liked because it has a lot of, like the name suggests, it has a lot of philosophical stuff behind it. So the key here is to associate each paradigm with a keyword. So let's say when you think of positivism, you think of objectivity. When you think of interpretivism, you think of meaning. When you think of constructivism, you of course think of constructing meaning based on your prior knowledge. When you think of critical theory, your mind should directly go to Paulo Freire or some sort of social change. When you think of pragmatism, maybe the underlying key here is practical solutions. So just remember the keywords of each paradigm. And let's say, for example, if the question is talking about measurement, scientific investigation, objectivity, then ideally your brain should navigate towards positivism. So if the question talks about human experiences, interpretation, meaning making, then you can think about interpretivism. And if it focuses on social empowerment, social transformation, inequality, all these issues, and how we can eradicate these issues using education, then your mind should navigate towards critical theory. So within these categories, the most frequently asked areas are from objective-based classification. You can say that you can read about action research, evaluation research, or you can read about exploratory versus descriptive research. If you think from a point of view of degree of structure, then you can focus on structured versus unstructured interview. If you focus on from control over variables, then you can look at experimental, quasi-experimental, and ex post facto. From analytical intent, if you're focusing, then you can read more about quantitative versus qualitative. You can read about the different research designs. And from philosophical paradigms, you can think about, I'm just giving you three examples. So you can think about positivism, interpretivism, and pragmatism. And ultimately, whenever you get a question on research, there are five questions that I've narrowed down that you can ask yourself if you're trying to find the answer. First is, what is the objective? What is the point of the question? What is it really trying to ask? How structured is the process of the research involved in that particular question? Is there manipulation of variables? What type of data is being analyzed? And what philosophical perspective is being followed? So once you ask these 4, 5 questions, you will automatically be able to narrow down what's going on and you will get your answer. Now, let's look at a few questions that I have taken from the paper that I took. So I searched it up on Google, and luckily I found a paper. It's uploaded on Google. The paper that I took when I cleared my net. So I have taken a few questions on research methodology from my paper, and I'll share with you how I solved them or what I thought when I approached the questions. So it is, you can also consider it to be like a very, very mini mock test. So you first see if you're able to answer the question by yourself, and then we can solve it together. Or like I'll tell you what I thought when I saw the question for the first time. Okay. Uh, I can see a few people have joined. I think it's Poonam and Mamta. Are you all able to hear me clearly now? If you can, like, unmute yourself and solve it with me, it would be great. Okay. Anyway, first let's look at the first question that I've put. What is not a research? Now, usually you would expect something like, okay, what is a research? But here it's the opposite. What is not a research? So, of course, here the answer is research the answer is the research is based on common sense knowledge and based on the accumulated experiences and beliefs of the people. That's the right answer, because that is not a research. Now, when I looked at this question, of course, I quickly read the 4 options that I had, but then I realized that I looked at other objectives. For example, objective number not objectives. I looked at the other options. Option number 1, 2, and 4, 3, 2, and then I realized that all the third option, it stood out to me the most, because I was like, research is literally not based on common sense knowledge. Like, of course, you can get ideas out of common sense knowledge, but you cannot base your research on it. The first thing that comes to your mind when you look at research is evidence, scientific, words like that. So it is not really based on accumulated experiences and the beliefs of people. It is a rigorous process that people follow. Now, also, when we look at research, when we think of research, we hear these terms that it is a systematic and a scientific investigation. It includes or it requires evidence, verification, and objectivity. And like I said, that common sense and beliefs may inspire research, but they're not research themselves. So, whenever you see words like beliefs, prejudice, assumptions, common sense in a question, usually, I'm not saying always, but usually they are the incorrect option in research methodology questions. So, I hope this one question is clear. Let's move on to the second question. Okay, so now what I felt was that such questions where you have to match the list 1 with list 2, personally found them a little bit time consuming because you had to read everything, and then after reading you had to literally match everything. So it was a little time consuming, but I'll tell you how I approached it. So what I did was the easiest ones that you can find, or the ones that are most obvious. For example, A के साथ भी A ही आता है. For example, the obvious ones that I solved first. So what I read when I read the word A theory, definition 3 here says on the right hand side, it is a set of systematically interrelated propositions that explain and predict a phenomenon or fact. Now this is a very obvious definition. मतलब theory मतलब यही होता है. So obviously in my head I was like A is 100% option number 3. And then when I looked at the options, I'm sorry, yeah. And then when I looked at the options, A के साथ 3 option number 4 में ही है. So then my first guess was that 99.99% my correct answer is option number 4. So I honestly, even if I didn't really look at other options, but still to be 100% sure, I of course tried to match the remaining options. So after looking at the fourth option, I looked at, let's say, model. So when we look at model, I try to match it with the first answer, that generalized representations of a system or an object that is constructed to some aspects of that system or the system as a whole. Then I tried to match option number C, which is survey, with the fourth option. It is a data collection technique using a questionnaire. Now, again, survey was the second most obvious definition for me because survey is 100% collecting data using a questionnaire. So then, when I tried matching answers like this, I 100% became sure of my answer that fine. The right answer is option number 4, which is, so when you match, A is option number 3, B is option number 1, then C is option number 4, and D is option number 2. So that way, when you make obvious connections first, the rest automatically follows. So this was my second question. Let's move on to the third question. I hope this is visible. Just 1 minute. Okay. Now, next thing is, let's evaluate all these four to five sentences, which is criteria for hypothesis construction, where you have to choose which answer is the correct answer from the options given below. So I quickly, brief reading, I read the options first, and then I thought that, okay, I tried to evaluate each statement. I was like, it should describe one issue only. So I was like, let me see. A good hypothesis should definitely be focused and deal with a specific problem or a relationship, not multiple unrelated issues. So this option seemed okay to me. Now I kept this fact in my mind. Then I moved on to the second option. It should describe many issues. Now see, the fact that I agree with the option number 1 so much, I was like, obviously this is not true. It should not describe many issues. So in my head, I made a mental note that the second point is incorrect. Then when I looked at option number C, it should specify variables between which the relation is to be established. So of course, a hypothesis is a very clear and focused statement. So it is, and one of its important characteristics is that it identifies the variables whose relationship is being studied. So again, I made a mental note that option number C seems to be correct. Then I moved to the option number D, where it says it should be specific and precise. Now, this particular point is very connected to the previous point. So again, in my head, I made a mental note that, okay, this is correct. And then when I read the last statement, it should be empirically testable, whether it is right or not. Again, that is connected to the previous 2 points. And in general, my understanding of what a hypothesis is. Now, of course, if I can't test it, so then what's the point of a hypothesis, right? So then again, after doing quick revision of the notes that I made in my mind, I came to a conclusion that option A, C, D, and E only are correct. And then I looked at the options and I was like, yeah, true. Option number 3, A, C, D, and E only is there. It's there. So then I chose that as my correct answer. Let's move to the next question. Scientific observations are based on dash dash dash. So this was like a fill in the blanks type of a question, and I'd got four options and I had to choose one. Now, let's say um, such questions come, I suggest you, of course, read the four options or four or five options that you have and try to fit each option one by one if you have the time. See which option is making the most sense. But if you want to do further analysis, you can, of course, use your logic, and you have to think what can you think when you hear of the two words scientific observations. So you think that scientific observation must be observable, it should be measurable, it should be verifiable. You start thinking of the different characteristics of a good scientific observation. So whenever you hear the word scientific, the first thing that comes to your mind is proof or evidence. And my suggestion is that whenever the word scientific or evidence or something like that comes in a question, you immediately look for keywords like evidence, data, verification, objectivity, words like this. And in this case, you can see it in the first option only, that there's a word called verifiable. So, yeah, you can then, of course, read the first option, which says verifiable evidence or systematic body of proof that can be cited. So, here I can see three keywords. One is verifiable, next is evidence, next is systematic, and four keywords actually. The fourth keyword is proof. So then I was like, yeah, this seems like a very sensible answer. And then eventually, when I read the second, third, and fourth options, I was like, no, this is not right. The first option is 100% correct. So that's why I chose the first answer, the first option. Now let's go to the next question, which is not a characteristic of narrative research design. Now, you remember when I told you about the different types of categories that you should study when you're preparing for research methodology? So this is a very clear question of one of the categories I'd mentioned in my previous one of my previous slides. So of course, I had studied about what a narrative research is, so I had a rough idea about what it is and what it is not. So, when you look at narrative research design, it studies life stories, experiences, personal accounts, and rating scales belong to quantitative research. So, my suggestion to you is whenever you see any research design, you ask yourself a few questions which I had mentioned before. So, when I read this, I asked myself, am I hearing a person's story, or am I hearing like a subjective opinion of a person, or is it like an individual experiences? And um, also, when I look at this particular question, I was like, yeah, it narrative research is about individual experiences. Coding and decoding is done to analyze the data that you get when you ask people their experiences. And for narrative research to happen successfully, you have to collaborate with participants. So now, then I realized that okay, collecting data through rating scale happens only when you're using a quantitative research approach, right? So then I thought that okay, now option number two is the option which is not a characteristic of narrative research. So, in short, if I have to tell you, I when I read questions, I ask myself many questions, and when I ask such questions, I automatically narrow it down, and then most of the times I get my answer. Now, the next question is, which of the following are the essential characteristics of good research hypothesis? So, again, in general, when we look at hypothesis, we know that hypothesis should be clear and precise. You know, you cannot give a very vague or a very random hypothesis. Now, of course, based on your hypothesis, you are going to do your research, right? So it has to be testable. So now this question was very, very obvious for me. Now it should be based on ethical consideration. Now, when I look at this option, I was like, while the entire research process and its methodologies must follow ethical boundaries, ethics don't really have to serve as an inherent metric or defining feature of a structural hypothesis statement itself. So I was like, let me keep this option in my mind, but it does not really seem like a very correct answer. Then I moved to option number D. It should be stated in general terms without specifics. Now, if I were to write this as my correct answer, it would contradict my first option. That is, it should be clear and precise. And I 100% knew that hypothesis is supposed to be clear and precise. So in my mind, and I made a very sure note that option number D is definitely like wrong. It should not be there. And then I moved to the next option. It should indicate a relationship between variables. So, of course, that is also there because a functional research hypothesis explicitly connects a dependent and independent variable to predict an outcome. So then I was like, okay, so for me, option number A, B, E seem correct, but option number C and D should be eliminated. So that's how I approached this question. And I have noticed that when we have such questions where we have multiple options and options seem very confusing and you feel like, okay, this could also be my right answer, but that could also be my right answer, the technique or the trick of elimination really helps me. I try to spot the most sensible, the most feasible answer, the most realistic answer, and then I try to eliminate the ones that seem less sensible. Or sometimes there are certain options which you 100% know that are not correct. So then you can eliminate those. Now we go to the last question for this particular topic, research methodology. Which is which of the following statements does not describe snowball sampling correctly? So I before I move to how I solved this question, I noticed that I in even the previous questions or in the different books that are there on net preparation, I saw that there are many questions which are like which of these statements do describe xyz or which of these statements do not describe xyz. So sometimes what happens is we tend to misread the question, even if it clearly says here that which of these statements do not describe, our brain tends to, or at least my brain tends to sometimes read which of these statements do describe, so I end up skipping the word not. So I suggest don't like make mistakes like me. Try to read the question very very carefully and see what it is asking. Now, coming to this question, let's look at all these questions for all these options first. So I did the same. I went through all the options. It is a non-probability sampling 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I quickly read the options, and then I realized that when I look at snowball sampling, it is it is definitely it does not you don't do it when the population is readily available. You have other sampling techniques for that. And if there is an equal chance of selection for everybody to be the research participants, then of course you don't do snowballing sampling. I know that. So while like I was thinking when I was reading the question, because when we look at snowball sampling, we know that it is a non-probability sampling technique. It is used for hard to reach populations, and here in this case participants only bring in the other participants. So it's like when I think of snowball, it's like a referral method where one brings the another. So here I felt that the option number 2, B and D only, that it is used when the target population is readily available, and it is the option number D, that it ensures equal chance of selection for all individuals. It does not describe snowball sampling correctly, so I think I chose that. Now let's move to teaching aptitude. Just give me 2 seconds and we will continue this. All right, I'm back. So moving on to teaching aptitude. So teaching aptitude, I felt that, of course, I'd read about it, but I was able to solve these questions because of the practical knowledge I'd gained with my teaching experience. So I feel here you have to use your logic more. You can use your teaching experience a lot here, like the practical experience that we have in our day-to-day lives in classrooms or with other teachers or in general in an institution, the kind of experiences we have It will help you solve these questions. Now, the way I approach research methodology, I had approached this particular topic as well, like in a similar fashion. So, same for teaching attitude, I looked at a few categories that helped me focus on this particular topic. So, here I focused on, like, the first category is levels of teaching. So I focused on the different levels that we have. So memory level teaching, understanding level teaching, reflective level teaching, all these different levels. And usually these questions try to test whether or not we've understood the differences between these three levels. So when you look at these three levels, you ask yourself, is the student simply recalling information? Is the student understanding concepts? Is the student analyzing, evaluating, and thinking critically? So when you ask yourself these three questions, when you read the question, um, the question in the exam, you will automatically understand what type of level they're talking about in the question. So, in very simple words, memory is recall, understanding, comprehension, and reflective is critical thinking. So, when you hear these terms, you automatically know that the question falls in the first category. So, your keywords would be that whenever words such as analysis, problem solving, critical thinking, or reflection come into your question, you realize that okay, now this is reflective level thinking. So, it's all about identifying the proper keywords that are there in the question. The next category is phases of teaching. So we should remember the three basic stages: pre-active, interactive, and post-active. So questions often test if you're trying to plan activities. They often test classroom activities, evaluation activities. So when you read the question, and in the question, if the teacher is preparing lesson plans, then of course it is pre-active. If the teacher is teaching in class, then it is interactive. And if the teacher is assessing learning outcomes, then it is post-active. So usually what I've noticed is that this area can be very direct when it comes to questions, and it is a pretty scoring topic. So yeah, the third category is methods of teaching. So my suggestion is you try to understand and read about as many methods of teaching as you can. I'm sure you have known and you've used multiple methods in your day-to-day life, but even theoretical words and theoretical understanding is important here. So the questions from this category usually ask students to identify the most suitable teaching method for a particular objective or a classroom situation. So we all know these basic common methods such as lecture method, discussion method, demonstration method, project method, problem solving method, and inquiry method. So you just understand what happens when we use any of these methods, and what ask yourself what is the objective of the lesson. Once you ask this question, you will automatically understand what method the question is asking for. So let's say if the objective is information delivery, then it will click in your mind that it is a lecture based method. If the objective is exchange of ideas, then it will pop in your head that it's a discussion method. If it's a skill demonstration, then of course demonstration method. If the objective is real life application, then it's a project method. If the objective is critical thinking, then it is a problem solving method. So I suggest that you focus on the appropriateness of a method rather than like understanding or memorizing its definition. The next category is the teaching support systems. So just a minute, sorry. Yeah. So next category is the teaching. The next category is the teaching support systems. So this category has become very, very important because it now involves educational technology, and uh, usually in net papers, they ask a lot of questions that are based on educational technologies. So various tools such as ICT tools, e-learning platforms, LMS systems, LMS as in learning management systems, educational software, multimedia resources. So these questions focus on these particular aspects. Now they may ask you questions on, let's say, AI or Google Classroom. So all these technological apps you should be aware of. My suggestion is try to, of course, we can't remember all the tools or all the latest technologies, but we should have a rough idea about what are some technologies or what are some apps that are used by teachers these days. So I believe when it comes to learning management systems, most people use Moodle or Google Classrooms. Or if you want to make a quick quiz, then you would think that Kahoot is a good option for you. So try to be like read more about what is the latest technology applied in education, or what is it that teachers and students prefer when it comes to computers and technology. Next is when we look at learner characteristics, um, these questions are like about motivation, learning styles, individual differences, readiness, prior knowledge, cognitive development. And I felt that, so my background is in psychology, which really helped me to solve these questions. But I felt that a lot of educational psychology based questions were given in this particular category. So different theories, Kohlberg, for example, or Eric Erikson, all these popular educational psychology theories, you can just revise them so that any question comes, you'll be able to answer them successfully. And one quick tip that I would like to give you is that whenever a question asks what should a teacher do first, the answer is often related to understanding students, assessing their prior knowledge, considering the individual differences in class. And these questions that are based on learner characteristics, they focus or they favor learner centered approaches more as compared to teacher centered approaches. And the last is evaluation systems. So it is again a very, I would say, a very well liked category, and I've seen it often. Like questions based on this category come often. So here I suggest you understand the different types of evaluation, be it formative, summative, diagnostic, or placement. Again, once you understand the purpose of each evaluation, what is the point of formative evaluation, what is the point of summative evaluation, so once you understand these different purposes and when to use these, you will be able to solve these questions in a very easy manner. So, yeah, that is about these different categories. Oh, my suggestion or my overall strategy for teaching aptitude questions would be that whenever you encounter a teaching aptitude question, you ask yourself, is it testing a level of teaching? Is it asking you about a teaching phase? Is it asking you for the most suitable teaching method? Is it asking you to think about a teaching tool or support system? Or is it talking about technology? Or is the focus on learner characteristics? Is the question more inclined towards the students or is it more inclined towards the teachers? Is it asking you about evaluation and assessment? So once you identify the category first, it makes the answer much easier to find. And if you feel like you have like you don't have enough time to ask yourself these questions, then simply narrow it down to these categories that I've given you. Now let's look at the questions that I've put. Again, I think most of these questions were questions that I got when I was appearing for the test. So let's see how I approached them. Now, the first question is, uh, it is about arranging these components in the context of effective learning environment. Now here I just had to like really read the options well, and I had to ask myself what comes first when creating an effective learning environment. So as a teacher, what would I do, or what steps would I follow to create an effective learning environment in my class? So I was like, okay, of course, 100%. I cannot start with assessment. Usually, or most of the times, assessment is at the end. And I cannot definitely not start with student support. Student support eventually comes later when you establish a rapport, etc., etc. So then I realized that, of course, the first thing that I need to do is focus on what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to teach it. So, because of that, the appropriate curriculum comes into the picture. So, I was like, okay, it might be possible that the curriculum comes first. Then my logic went like, okay, then now that I have an appropriate curriculum, I have to figure out a very good way of delivering it. So then I could see the option number D, that engaging pedagogy is there. So then I thought maybe that is appropriate. And then I saw, is there any option which goes like C and D? And then I saw that, okay, option number 3 starts with CD. So then in my mind, I made a mental note saying that, okay, it could be right. The option number 3 could be right. So then, of course, I did read other options. Then I read after CD, there's A in option number 3. So I was like, is it making sense? Continuous formative assessment. Then after that, is adequate support, student support making sense? And is providing suitable resources and infrastructure coming at the last? So I was like, yeah, this is making sense. So then I ended up selecting option number 3. So I didn't have to think much in this question. And one I would say one trick or tip that I would like to give you is try to figure out when such questions come, arrange the following components like properly. Try to figure out what is the foundation or what is the foundational element and what could come at the very last. So once you have these two answers ready, like you will have your first option ready and then you will have your last option ready. So all you have to do is figure out how to assemble the other options in a proper order. Now, moving on to the next question that I had. What among the following are known as assessment instruments? Now, personally, I don't know if I've written the right answer to this or not, but uh, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that I found this question very, very tricky when I saw it. What among the following are known as assessment instruments? Now, if I just have a glance at the options, I feel like all of them make sense, like all of them are assessment instruments. So then I thought that maybe all five are there. But if I look at the options given to me below, there is no option that says all five are correct. So then I was like, huh, now this is a trick question. So I tried to differentiate all five like I tried to differentiate on how they stand apart from each other. And then I was thinking what each particular instrument involves, and then it clicked my mind that when we look at rubrics, it is of course essential to the broader grading process, but it does not act as a primary or independent information gathering tool or instrument in itself. So of course it helps you assess your student, but when you look at the other instruments, they are like proper instruments. So then I was like, is there any option that does not involve C, like rubrics, the option number C, rubrics? And then of course the others make sense. So I ended up writing I ended up excluding rubrics from my answer. The next is matching list 1 with list 2. So again, in this question, um, I I personally I remember I tried to match like one with the option given on the right hand side. So when I looked at encouraging students deep approaches to learning objectives, first I tried to spot the obvious. So personally, I had read critical theory, and then it clicked my mind that option number C, facilitating dialogic forms of feedback, that is 99% of the time it's there when feedback should be embedded within assessment practices. Like it matched to me, and in my head I was like, this is 100% making sense to me. So I my eyes narrowed down to the option number 2, where I can see that C is connected to option number 1. Then the second most obvious uh, option for me was that involving some personal student investment was very well connected to greater sense of ownership by students. So then I was like, yeah, these two are very obvious to me. And sorry, and in all the options, out of all the options, it is only in option number 3 that C is matching with 3 and D is matching with 1. So of course I tried to match and try to figure out if A matches with 4 and B matches with 2. And in my head it did. So I ended up choosing option number 3, which is A, which is encouraging students deep approaches to learning objectives, is matching with option number 4, that is a variety of assessment for student motivation. B, the summative and formative assessments to be learning oriented, is matching with the implication um, Just a second. Yeah, apologies. I had some internet issues. What I was trying to say was yes, A is matching, encouraging students' deep approaches to learning objectives with a variety of assessment for student motivation. And then B was definitely matching with task design should be approached from a program wide perspective. And then the others I'd already figured out. So, your also my suggestion is you find out the most obvious matching pairs so that it's easier for you to get your option out of the given options and also make sense of the other options. Now this question is a very easy one. So like here they're asking you the role of a teacher in supporting experiential learning cannot be of or the. So when I look at role, a coach is a role, a mentor is a role, a tutor is a role, but technology is not a role. So even when you look at the words, it doesn't technology doesn't really fit in the sentence, even if you look at the words and the word forms. But if I really read the content, I cannot, as a teacher, I cannot be the role of a technology. Of course, I can use technology in my classroom, but my role cannot be that of a technology. So then this was pretty easy to choose. Sometimes they give you such easy questions and then you get a smile on your face because of how easy they are. So this was one of them. Next is arrange the of Bloom's taxonomy from lower to higher order in the cognitive domain. Now, again was a quite easy question for me because while studying the theory part of education, Bloom's taxonomy is very famous. Even while making lesson plans, we keep Bloom's taxonomy in mind. So this was a very like, okay, I've read this before, so I'm able to, I'm able to rearrange or I'm able to put the options from lower to higher order in the cognitive domain. So I was able to solve this question only because I had read it before. Like I know what the lower to higher order in the cognitive domain is. So this is because of that. And this again falls in one of the categories that I had mentioned earlier. So yeah, this is about that. The next question is what are the main objectives of in-service education for teachers? So coming to this question, just a minute. Yeah. Now this such questions, I felt that when these questions again are very time consuming to me because they are very lengthy. So I again like tried to quickly have a glance and quickly read what they're talking about to provide financial incentive to the teachers. Now, this, like when we think of teaching or when we look at ourselves and when we think that, okay, I'm a teacher, we don't really think about option number A, right? We think about doing the best for our students. So then in my mind, I made a mental note that, okay, this is not the best option for me. Then I looked at option number two and yeah. Then I looked at option number two, and I was like to help teachers to know their problems and to solve by pooling their resources and wisdom. So I was like, yeah, this is something that we all do as teachers. So then I made a note that okay, this seems like the correct option. Then I moved to option number three to broaden the mental outlook of teachers. And I was like, again, this makes sense to me. Then to increase the professional efficiency of the teacher, again, this makes a lot of sense because it is suggested that teachers engage in continuous professional development courses and professional development programs. So that is very much related to point number D. And the last is to provide the facility away from the place of duty. Now, this is a very obvious thing that this is not the right option. So then I had made a mental note earlier that option number A doesn't making is not making sense. Option number E clearly is not making sense, and option number B, C, D. These three are definitely making sense. So then I chose. Then I saw that in my options list option B, C, D only is there. So I definitely chose option number 3, B, C, D only. And the last answer is, the last question is, which of the following tools are more suitable for creating videos for teaching and learning? Like I said earlier, that usually, and now I've seen that net questions have a lot of educational technology related questions. And in my, like, while I was doing my MA, I came across these apps, and I personally also use these apps. So I had a rough idea about what app does what. So I knew that when we have to create videos, B and C are very good options. I think, if I'm not wrong, the Screencast-O-Matic has changed its name. I'm not really sure what the new name is, but B and C are definitely the two apps that help you make videos. Kahoot is for quiz, Meister is for mind mapping, and Jamboard I knew because on Zooms or like on Google Meets, we do have an option where we can draw on whiteboards, or we can explain using a whiteboard, and Jamboard is also something like that. So then it was easy for me to choose B and C. So these are the few questions, and that's it for today's session from my end. And I hope it has helped you. These are my references, and thank you so much. Uh, Mandeep ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Stuti. Thank you for your effortful session for
Ma'am, I can't hear you.
Stuti, can you hear from my side?
No, ma'am, you're not audible. The mic off.
Stuti, I hope you can hear from my side. Is there a lot of echo? Stuti, on behalf of Bombay Teachers Training College and other our collaborating members, I convey humble thanks for organizing today's event. And
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're on mute.
can you hear me? Can you hear from my side? If you're writing on the chat, I think my chat also is not visible to me. Is it better now? Can you all hear from my side? Tuti, can you hear from my side? If you will stop sharing your screen. So I think we can wind up today's session. If you all can hear from my side, thank you, Stuti, for today's session. I just wanted to say to the students that now the practical sessions over here at BTTC are over. And now it is time for them for self-preparation, and we will be sharing the mock tests with you. So Stuti, can you hear from my side? Stuti, am I audible now? So I am once again conveying humble thanks to Ms. Stuti for the session which
Yes,
she has
ma'am, I can.
organized on behalf of Bombay Teachers Training College. And I request all the students, it's your duty now to remain in touch with us and
Yes,
please
ma'am, you are audible.
follow the links of mock testing. So we will be sharing the links of mock testing on the WhatsApp group. So please keep following that and wishing you all very good luck for your examination. Remain in touch and keep working hard. So that is what we can wish for our students, and whatever the study material is available, it is posted on the groups also, and it is posted on our VTTC YouTube also. So wishing you all very good luck. We can close today's session and teachers will remain in touch with you. I hope, Suti, I am audible now. And thank you for today's session. Wishing you all very good luck. We can close today's session.